He had no idea the woman who would save his life was the same one he broke years ago, or that the boy clutching her hand would carry his face. Robert Vale stood frozen, his breath caught in his chest, but not from illness this time. The man who'd built an empire with nothing but iron will and cold calculation suddenly found himself powerless in the face of something he couldn't control. Not business, not the boardroom, not billions, but a child. The small boy looked up with wide, curious eyes, thick, dark curls, olive-toned skin, and a jawline that mirrored Dorian's own, down to the proud tilt of the chin. It was like staring at a photograph of his own childhood, only gentler, warmer. "Mama," the boy said, tugging at the woman's hand. She didn't look away from Dorian. Her gaze was steady, unreadable. "This is Cale," she said, her voice calm but edged with something sharp. "Your son." His world stopped. No boardroom defeat, no hostile takeover, no headline scandal could have prepared him for this. He opened his mouth to speak. Nothing came out. "I didn't know," he finally choked, his voice barely audible. "I know," she replied. "I tried." The silence that followed was heavy, stretched between them like a bridge too damaged to cross. Her name was Marin, the woman he had once loved deeply, the one he had walked away from, the one who now carried the part of him he never knew existed. And if the doctors were right, the one who now held the key to saving his life. If you believe in second chances, in healing, in the kind of stories that remind us we're not too far gone to come back home, hit that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to join the Mr. Ross story trail. Because what you're about to hear, it's not just a story, it's a wake-up call for the heart. He'd asked to meet his anonymous donor. The hospital advised against it, told him it would complicate things, too emotional, too unpredictable. But when they gave him the first name, just one word, his heart had stopped. Marin. He hadn't heard it aloud in 5 years, yet it echoed like a bell toll in his chest. He thought it couldn't be. It had to be a coincidence. But now, standing before her, older, stronger, eyes full of fire, he knew fate didn't deal in coincidence. It dealt in consequences. "How long have you known?" he asked, his voice rough. She looked at him for a long moment, then answered with something he didn't expect. "I prayed you'd come back before he was born," she said. "And when you didn't, I prayed that if we ever crossed paths again, I'd be strong enough to look you in the eye and not break." She exhaled. "Today's that day." Robert lowered his gaze to the boy again. Cale. The name was unfamiliar, but the love in the way she said it, the way he clung to her, that wasn't. "You have a good mother," Robert said softly. Cale tilted his head. "Are you sick?" "Yes," Robert admitted. "Very." There was a pause, and then, in a voice barely above a whisper, the boy asked, "Will you be better if I give you my crayons?" The question cracked something inside him. He laughed, not out of humor, but out of grief, out of awe, out of disbelief that this boy, his boy, was so pure. He looked back at Marin, throat tight. "Why are you doing this?" he asked her. She hesitated. "Because I don't want Cale to grow up without a father, even if you were never planning to be one." He nodded slowly, ashamed. "I was young, scared, cold." "You were a coward," she said simply. "But cowards can still become men, if they choose to." There, in the quiet garden of the hospital, something passed between them. A moment of truth, a flicker of what could still be. And deep inside, Robert whispered a prayer. Not for more time, or for forgiveness he hadn't earned, but for the strength to become worthy of the grace he was being shown. "God, I don't deserve a second chance, but if you're handing me one anyway, help me not waste it." She didn't cry, not when she saw him, not when she told him the truth. That hurt more than yelling ever could. Robert had expected fury, maybe even hatred. Instead, she looked at him like someone looking at a wound that had already scarred over, too long ago to keep bleeding, but still tender if pressed. He wanted to say something that mattered, but words had never been his strength. Control was. Power, plans, strategies, not this. Marin crouched down and fixed Cale's collar, brushing invisible dust off his little jacket. "Why don't you go draw in the grass, baby?" she said gently. Cale nodded, still glancing at Dorian, then trotted off with a small box of colored pencils under his arm. The silence returned. "I didn't know you tried to reach me," Robert finally said. You didn't want to be found, Marin replied. You made sure of that. He closed his eyes. The weight of her words, undeniable. I thought disappearing would protect you, he said quietly. No, she replied. It protected you. There was no malice in her voice, just the truth. A kind of peace born from surviving the worst. He had been a storm in her life once, fierce, consuming, and gone without warning. But she'd weathered it. She hadn't just survived, she'd grown. I can't undo what I did, he said, but I can ask you this. Why give part of yourself to save me? Her lips pressed into a line. Then she looked over to Cale, now lying on his stomach in the grass, drawing. Because one day that little boy is going to ask me who his father was, she said. And I want to be able to tell him you tried. Dorian's throat tightened. I don't expect you to forgive me, he said. Good, she answered. Because I didn't do this for you. Her honesty was sharp but necessary, the kind of clarity he had spent years avoiding. I want to try, he said. Whatever that means. I want to be there for him. I want to know him. Start by showing up, she said. That's what he needs. That's what I needed. The words weren't said with resentment. They were said with boundaries. And boundaries, Robert realized, weren't rejection. They were strong. He watched as Cale ran up, holding out a page he had colored. 3 figures holding hands. One taller, one with long hair, one small and smiling in the middle. This is us, Cale said proudly. Robert stared at it. A lump rose in his chest, painful in its beauty. Marin looked at him. You still have the surgery, she said. This doesn't change that. I know, he replied. But it changes everything else. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a pen, and wrote his phone number on the back of the drawing. Even if I don't wake up, he said, voice thick, please give this to him one day. Let him know I wanted to be in his life. Marin took the paper, held it for a second, then folded it gently and tucked it into her purse. There was a long pause. Robert turned to leave, but she stopped him with a quiet voice. Dorian? He looked back. She took a breath. If you mean what you said, prove it. Not with promises, with presence. Their eyes met. No more masks. No more power games. Just 2 people. And the unspoken possibility of healing. Robert walked away from that garden with a new kind of fear. Not of failure, not dying, but of finally having something to lose and the courage to fight for it. At exactly 6 a.m., the 39th floor of Arden Enterprises flickered to life. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a sleeping Manhattan, its skyline still stretching under the soft glow of early light. Below, the city pulsed with ambition, taxis flashing past intersections, delivery, trucks unloading quietly, the occasional jogger weaving between steel and stone. The city was waking up. But Robert Vale had already been awake for hours. He stood in his office, coffee untouched, eyes locked on a financial report as if it were a battlefield map. Every line mattered. Every margin held weight. Nothing escaped his eye. Precision wasn't a goal, it was a requirement. This was his world. He had built it from the ground up. Not inherited, not gifted. Built with grit, ruthlessness, and a mind that never stopped calculating. The room around him reflected that very discipline. Minimalist, impeccable, glass, steel, sharp corners, no clutter, no distractions. The only personal item on his desk was a sleek silver pen engraved with his initials, DV. His assistant knocked twice and entered with practiced calm. Morning, Mr. Vale. The Tokyo numbers just came in. Marketing is waiting for your green light to launch the revised campaign. He didn't glance up. Tell them to hold. I want a full breakdown of customer response by segment before we commit another cent. Of course, sir. And cancel the media brunch. I don't do fluff. Understood. She left quickly, quietly. Robert didn't do small talk. He didn't do casual. Every interaction was a transaction. Every relationship a lever. Something to push, pull, or cut loose if it got in the way. He had been called many things. Visionary, shark, machine. Some admired him. Others feared him. Most simply stayed out of his path. But behind closed doors, there was a different kind of silence. Not the productive kind, the hollow kind. Robert had no friends in this building. No one is truly close. Just networks, alliances, arrangements. And yet, none of them knew the weight he carried in quiet moments. The pause between meetings. the split second before an elevator door opened. That strange, unwelcome echo inside him that even success couldn't drown out. He was 37. By all outward measures, he had won. Private jet, multiple homes, industry awards, magazine covers. But what did he go home to? A penthouse with no family photos, an empty kitchen, a couch never sat on, a bed never shared. In this empire he ruled, he had everything, except rest. Robert Vale didn't believe in coincidence. He believed in data, in results, in cause and effect. If something happened, it was because someone made a decision, either wisely or poorly, and he prided himself on rarely making poor ones. His calendar was structured to the second. His suits were custom-stitched down to the millimeter. His diet was engineered by a private chef and reviewed monthly by a physician. Even his 6 hours of nightly sleep were not a luxury. They were an investment in performance. In the world of Arden Enterprises, Robert wasn't just CEO, he was the axis. Every major decision passed through him. Mergers, acquisitions, restructures, all his doing. When competitors hesitated, he advanced. When others got emotional, he became sharper. He had no time for ego, just results. And yet, every once in a while, when the office was quiet and the skyline no longer impressed him, Robert would catch himself staring out the glass, wondering how long it had been since he truly felt something that wasn't laced with strategy. There was a story whispered among his top executives that Roberton smiled during a pitch meeting. No one had seen it firsthand. Some believed it, some didn't. Most thought it was just a myth used to keep new employees guessing. Because in truth, Robert didn't smile. He won. He conquered. He controlled. That was how he survived. The last time he had let someone into his life, into his real self, it had nearly undone him. He had felt himself slipping, becoming soft, unguarded. It was intoxicating and terrifying. So he'd done what he thought was necessary. He cut it off. Fast, clean, no explanation, no looking back. Since then, Robert had fortified himself. No emotions, no distractions, just growth. But nothing grows forever without cost. At his last annual health screening, his physician had said something strange. "You're burning at both ends, Dorian. That pace, that pressure. Your body's not made of steel." He had dismissed it. Another exaggerated warning. Doctors always erred on the side of caution. But lately, the fatigue had crept in like smoke under a locked door. Meetings felt longer. His vision blurred after too many hours. Some mornings, he felt pressure in his side he couldn't ignore. Still, he powered through. Weakness was a liability. Slowing down wasn't an option. Not now. Not when Arden was preparing to acquire 2 major international subsidiaries. He brushed it off as stress. Dehydration, a temporary drop in focus. It would pass, but it didn't. And when the fainting spell happened in the middle of a board presentation, when the glass of water shattered in his hand before he hit the floor, the first crack in Robert Vale's perfect image became public. Reporters speculated. Rumors spread. His team scrambled to contain the fallout. But behind closed doors, it was something far more serious. And soon he would find out just how little control he truly had. Before the skyscrapers, before the title, before the empire, there was her, Marin Elise. Robert had wandered into her world by accident, or at least that's what he told himself back then. In truth, it had been the first real pause in his life. He remembered the day with clarity he didn't think his memory was capable of. It had been unusually quiet in the city, not the kind of quiet that blanketed the streets, but the kind that hums in your chest when the noise outside finally matches the ache within. He was walking alone, avoiding a meeting he didn't want to attend. Midtown blurred around him, glass, metal, and movement, until he found himself standing outside a small art studio tucked between a dry cleaner and a bakery. A sign hung on the door, hand-painted in soft gold script, Elise Studio and Gallery. Through the glass, he saw color, real color, not branding, not power suits, but color that moved, wild, untamed, alive. It startled him. Something inside stirred, something he hadn't felt in years. He stepped inside, and there she was. Marin was barefoot on a step stool, painting a canvas taller than she was. Her hair was tied up, cheeks smudged with green and amber, a paintbrush between her teeth as she reached for a new stroke. She didn't hear him at first. When she did, She looked over her shoulder and smiled, not the polished kind he saw in business meetings, but the kind that made time shift. "You're either very lost," she said, hopping down, "or meant to be here." He had no idea how to respond. For the first time in a long time, words didn't come easily. "I guess both," he managed. That was how it started. He returned the next day. And the next, always with an excuse, a framed piece that caught his eye, a question about color, a vague interest in a commission. Maren saw through it all, but she didn't push. She let him exist in her space, and in doing so, he began to breathe differently. Her world was soft where his was sharp, warm where he was sterile. She painted with her hands, hummed when she was lost in thought, and kept a jar of mismatched buttons on the windowsill because it's nice to keep the forgotten things. Robert didn't understand it, but he liked being around it, around her. They spent evenings talking, sometimes about everything. She told him about growing up with a single mother who worked 2 jobs and still found time to read poetry aloud at bedtime, about how she got her first paint set from a neighbor who noticed her sketching on scrap paper. He didn't offer much about his own past, not at first, but one night, sitting on the floor of her studio, lit only by fairy lights and half-finished canvases, he told her things no one else knew, about the weight of expectation, the coldness of his childhood home, the way silence was used like a weapon, the pressure to win, to produce, to never feel too much. She listened, not like someone waiting to reply, but like someone honoring what was said. That night, she reached for his hand. "You don't have to be perfect with me," she whispered. He didn't reply, but he didn't pull away either. Their connection didn't need a label. It existed quietly between long conversations and soft touches, in the way she said his name when he doubted himself, in the way he brought her tea without asking how she took it. For the first time in his life, Robert found stillness, not in solitude, but in her. Maren never asked for more than he could give, but she offered more than he thought he deserved. In those brief months, they built something sacred, not flashy, not showy, just real. Robert would lie awake beside her, her head resting on his chest, her breath slowing in sleep, and feel something unfamiliar, peace. But peace, to a man like Dorian, felt like danger. It made him vulnerable. It chipped away at the walls he had built to protect himself from the ache of absence, from the fear that anything he loved would eventually be taken away. One night, after a quiet dinner and hours spent watching her paint while he worked beside her on the floor, Maren turned to him and asked, "Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" She asked it playfully, with a crooked smile, but something in him recoiled. He answered too quickly, too flat. "Where I am now, only higher." Her smile faded a little. He saw it. He hated that he'd caused it, but he didn't know how to fix it. Because if he admitted he wanted her in that picture, in 5 years, in 10, in forever, it meant risking something he had never dared to before. So he buried it. That week he stopped staying the night. Then came the silence between texts, the broken promises, the missed visits, until one day he didn't show up at all. No warning, no goodbye. Only a letter slid beneath her door. It wasn't cruel, but it wasn't kind either. It was composed, careful, distant. He told her she deserved someone who could give her more, someone not bound by ambition, someone free enough to be present. He told her she was light and he was built for shadow. And in closing, he wrote the one sentence that stayed with her long after the ink dried. "If I stayed, I'd only ruin you." He thought it was noble. But being noble doesn't stop a heart from breaking. Maren didn't chase him. She read the letter once, folded it gently, and tucked it into the back of her sketchbook. She cried alone. Then, slowly, she began to rebuild. And he threw himself into expansion, growth, deals, travel, anything to drown the sound of what he'd left behind. But some nights, in the silence of hotel rooms, in the pause before the next negotiation, he'd see a smear of color on a gallery window, or hear someone humming under their breath, and her memory would knock the wind out of him. He would wonder what she was painting now, if she had forgotten him, if she had forgiven him. He never reached out. Pride held the phone hostage, and fear kept it silent. He told himself she was better off, but some part of him never believed it. The first time Robert noticed something was wrong, he dismissed it. He was in a meeting, fourth of the day, seated at the head of a long glass table while analysts presented quarterlies. The numbers were up, but his focus wasn't. His vision blurred at the edges, just enough to be annoying. His temples throbbed. His mouth felt dry. He told himself it was fatigue, jet lag, lack of sleep. He nodded, gave a few sharp commands, and ended the meeting 10 minutes early. Unheard of. That night, he went home, poured a glass of water, and stared at the skyline for hours. Something inside him felt off. Not pain exactly, just wrong. The next morning, he woke up on the floor of his bedroom. No memory of falling, no warning. Still, he didn't call a doctor. Instead, he rescheduled his morning calls and told his assistant he had a personal errand. He didn't want questions. He didn't want to be concerned. Concern made people look closer. But over the next few weeks, things got worse. Random nausea, loss of appetite, night sweats, sharp pains just below his ribs. He could no longer hide the exhaustion behind caffeine or tailored suits. The circles under his eyes deepened. His posture, once straight and commanding, began to slump without him noticing. The board noticed. One afternoon, during a review session, his closest executive advisor pulled him aside. "You look worn down," she said carefully. "I'm fine," he replied. "Are you?" He didn't answer. But that night, after nearly collapsing again, he finally made the call. He arrived at the private clinic under a false name, an old habit from years of press intrusion. The nurses didn't ask questions. The physician, however, did. Dozens of them. Blood work followed, scans, more silence. When the results came in, the doctor didn't smile. "You're dealing with a genetic liver condition," she said. "A rare one." Robert didn't flinch. "Fix it. It's not that simple. How long do I have? Without a transplant? Months, maybe less." The words didn't land at first. They floated, heavy but unregistered. He had faced hostile takeovers, legal threats, and national scrutiny. Nothing had ever shaken him. But this wasn't a contract to negotiate. This wasn't an enemy to outmaneuver. This was his own body, betraying him. "We'll begin managing your condition immediately," the doctor continued. "But you need to understand, your case is urgent. You'll need to be evaluated for a transplant listing." He nodded numbly. "And there's something else." She hesitated before continuing. "Your blood type, it's uncommon. Which limits match." Robert exhaled slowly, his gaze drifting to the corner of the room. "What are the odds?" "Very slim," she replied, "but not zero. We'll refer you to an extended donor registry. There's a private network we sometimes use, discreet, anonymous." He agreed. What choice did he have? The news never reached the public, not officially. But in the world Robert moved through, silence always meant something. He missed 2 press events. He declined an award dinner. Shareholders grew anxious. Whispers started circling like sharks sensing weakness in the water. And the board had questions. He showed up to meetings looking pale. His voice, once commanding and steady, began to falter. A few times he forgot key points in presentations, something he'd never done in over a decade. Still, he refused to explain. Admitting illness to him was equal to surrender. So he spun vague answers. Blamed the flu, blamed off days, even as he wore heavier coats in mild weather, even as his hands trembled when he signed documents. But the truth had its own momentum, and the body keeps score. At night, he couldn't sleep. His dreams were crowded with the past, things he hadn't thought of in years. His father's cold eyes, the sound of an empty dining room, a canvas with green and amber paint, laughter that once calmed his storm. Marin. Her name returned uninvited, like a voice echoing from a locked door. He would dismiss it, shake it off, tell himself that wasn't where his focus should be. But it kept returning, and with it, a feeling he hadn't felt in a long time, regret. The hospital moved quickly. Robert was fortunate. His wealth gave him access to private channels. The evaluation process for the transplant began with testing, interviews, and medical history reviews. Some donors were ruled out within hours. Others lingered on a list of possibles that shrank day by day. He hated needing help, hated the waiting, hated the thought that his future no longer belonged to him alone. And worst of all, he began to feel something he had never allowed room for before. Fear. For the first time, There was no deadline he could extend, no analyst he could hire, no consultant he could outbid. He was running out of time. 3 weeks into the process, he received a call from his physician's private line. "There's been movement on your match," she said. He sat up. "Already? We had your file shared with a national registry used for hard-to-match cases. Private, untraceable. A highly rare match came through." His heart pounded. "How soon?" "We're arranging further screening, but the preliminary indicators are nearly perfect." The donor agreed to anonymous contact. He closed his eyes, the first flicker of hope piercing the exhaustion. "Do I get a name?" She hesitated. "Only the first." "That's enough." A pause. Then she said it. "Marin." Dorian's breath caught. It hit like a blow to the chest. The room spun. He didn't hear the next few words the doctor said. Something about follow-ups, privacy, next steps. He heard only the name. Her name. It couldn't be. There had to be others with that name. It had to be a coincidence. But deep down, he knew. Marin. The woman he had walked away from. The one person he had cared for beyond ambition. The one he hurt the most. And now, she was offering him the one thing he couldn't buy. Life. The name wouldn't leave his mind. Marin. He told himself it wasn't her, that it couldn't be. But denial couldn't stand up against memory. That name wasn't common in his world, and it had come at the exact moment he was forced to confront his mortality. The more he tried to distance himself from the possibility, the louder it echoed. Robert paced his penthouse like a man on trial. Thoughts swirled in sharp fragments. What if it was her? Why would she agree to help him? Did she know who the recipient was? He needed to know. He couldn't keep pretending this was just a medical procedure. Not anymore. When he called the hospital to request a meeting with the donor, the transplant coordinator tried to shut it down immediately. "It goes against every boundary we set up," she said. "Anonymous donors are protected. You agreed to this in your file." "I understand," Robert said calmly. "But I need to see her. I won't speak publicly. I won't document it. This isn't for negotiation or press. It's personal. You realize she has the right to refuse. If it's the person I think it is, she won't." The coordinator hesitated. "We can't force the meeting." "Then ask. Discreetly. If she agrees, I'll be there." A pause. Then a sigh. "I'll contact her." He waited less than 12 hours for the answer. A quiet message from the hospital liaison. Donor agreed to meet. One time. Private setting. No cameras, no press. You'll meet in the hospital's secured garden. Tomorrow, 3 p.m. He stared at the message for a long time. His hand trembled as he set the phone down. The next morning passed in a haze. He didn't attend meetings, didn't open emails. He stared out the window, wearing a suit he hadn't bothered to button fully. Something inside him was shifting, something he didn't yet have the words for. At 2:40 p.m., Robert entered the hospital through a private entrance, escorted by a discreet security officer who left him at a garden gate. He stepped through alone. It was quiet. The garden was small but well kept. Ivy curled up the stone walls. Wind moved gently through tall grass along the edges. Wooden benches lined the curved pathway, a space designed for healing or waiting. And there she was, standing near the fountain, back straight, hands clasped loosely in front of her. Marin. She turned as he approached, and for a split second, the world stopped moving. She looked older, not in a weary way, but in a way that spoke of life lived. Her hair was longer, her frame is stronger. There was a calm steadiness in her that disarmed him. He forgot his script, forgot what he'd rehearsed. All he managed was her name, Marin. She looked at him with a gaze so composed, it rattled him. "You look different," he said. "Alive?" "You should try it," she replied, her tone dry. He almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was her. Still sharp, still true. "You agreed to meet me," he said. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either," she replied. "But here we are." There was silence. Heavy, not empty, but full of all the years left unsaid. He cleared his throat. "Is it really you? The donor?" She nodded once. He swallowed hard. "Why?" Marin looked past him, toward the pathway, toward something he hadn't noticed yet. "Because it's not just about you." Before he could ask what she meant, a voice broke through the quiet. "Mama." Robert turned. A little boy was standing near the ivy wall, his hand still tucked into a pocketful of colored pencils. And, in an instant, everything changed. Marin didn't move when he stepped into the garden. She stood with the stillness of someone who had made peace with chaos, someone who had been broken once and stitched herself back together without asking for help. Robert slowed his pace. Every step toward her felt heavier than the last. "Marin," he said again, softer this time. She nodded. "You've said my name twice now. You can stop." There was no anger in her tone, but no softness either. She wasn't here for his guilt. She wasn't here to soothe anything. She was here because she had agreed to give him life. The irony cut deep. "I didn't think you'd actually come," he said, trying to read her. "I almost didn't," she replied. "Then why?" "I needed to see for myself," she interrupted. "What a man looks like after he's erased someone and still manages to sleep at night." He took that in, a little staggered. But he didn't deny it. "Couldn't. I didn't come here to defend what I did." "Good," she said quickly, "because there is no defense." A silence settled between them. Not awkward, but charged. Robert exhaled. "I didn't know how to be what you needed." "You didn't even ask," she replied. "You left without a word, no closure, no explanation. Just a few lines on a piece of paper, like I was a contract you terminated." His chest tightened. Her words weren't loud, but they struck harder than anything that had ever been said to him. "I thought it would be easier for you if I left cleanly." "Cleanly?" she echoed, a bitter smile forming. "You think abandonment can be clean?" He looked down. He had nothing to offer in return. Nothing she hadn't already said better. Marin folded her arms, keeping a careful distance. She studied him, not with wonder or nostalgia, but with the caution of someone who'd learned not to trust too easily. "You haven't changed much," she said. "You still dress like you're at war." He gave a half laugh. "Some days, it feels like I am." She raised an eyebrow. "Then maybe stop choosing the battlefield." The air shifted. Her presence was more commanding than he remembered, not in the way boardroom alphas tried to posture, but in the quiet way a survivor stands, unshaken, rooted. "I'm not here to ask for pity," he said, "or forgiveness." "Good," she replied, "because those aren't yours to demand." Another pause. He searched for a place to land the conversation, but everything felt hollow. "Marin, this diagnosis, it's real. I didn't know where else to turn." "You didn't turn to me," she said coldly. "The hospital did." He opened his mouth to respond, but she looked past him, her eyes softening. "Because it's not just about you." Before he could ask what she meant, a young voice called out gently, "Mama?" Robert turned, and his entire world stopped moving. The voice was soft, curious, a single word, "Mama." Robert turned. The boy standing a few steps away couldn't have been more than 4, maybe 5. He had wide, thoughtful eyes and a box of colored pencils clutched in one hand. His curls bounced as he walked toward Marin, his steps unhurried, completely unaware of the weight his presence carried. Marin knelt instinctively. "There you are." He leaned into her arms. She kissed the top of his head like it was second nature, because it was. Then she looked up. Robert was still frozen. The boy glanced at him. His stare lingered longer than a child normally would. Then he spoke again. "Who's that?" Marin stood slowly and rested a hand on the boy's shoulder. "This is Dorian," she said gently. The boy squinted. "Do I know him?" There was a pause. "No," she said softly. "Not yet." Robert took a careful step forward, then another. The space between them felt both impossibly small and painfully vast. Marin watched closely, not stopping him, but not encouraging him either. "What's your name?" Robert asked. The boy tilted his head, as if measuring whether to respond. "Cale." Robert repeated it under his breath. "Cale." It was the first time he'd heard the name, and yet somehow it didn't feel foreign. It landed in his chest like it had been there all along, waiting. "I like your pencils," Robert offered, his voice gentler than usual. Cale looked down at them, then backed up. "I was drawing a robot treehouse. It has lasers." Robert smiled. "Sounds powerful." "It is," Cale replied, "but only the good kind of lasers." He nodded solemnly, as if this was an important distinction. Robert swallowed. His throat felt tight. He looked at Marin. Her face had softened, but her eyes still carried the barrier he had earned. He turned back to Cale. "I didn't know about you," he said honestly. "No one told me." Cale blinked. "Mama said you went away." "I did," Robert said. "And that was a mistake." There was silence, the kind that only children know how to fill with something unexpected. "You look like me," Cale said matter-of-factly. Dorian's breath hitched. He crouched to the boy's level. "I've been told I'm very lucky." Cale smiled shyly, then stepped behind Marin's leg, peeking out again after a second. Marin cleared her throat, her voice steady. "I tried, Dorian. I tried calling. I emailed. I sent letters to your office. They never got through. I stopped after the second year." His head lowered. "My gatekeepers were trained to keep distractions out," he said. "I didn't think they'd include you." She gave a quiet, bitter laugh. "I was the woman carrying your child. I guess that qualifies." He didn't respond. There was nothing he could say that wouldn't sound small. Instead, he looked at the boy again. Cale was crouched down now, drawing on the stone edge of the fountain with one of his pencils. "A red one. Did he know about me?" Robert asked. Marin shook her head. "I never told him your name. I didn't want him waiting for someone who might never show up." He nodded slowly. "I want to know him," Robert said quietly. "If you'll let me." She looked at him. The walls in her eyes didn't come down, but they shifted, slightly. "Don't say that unless you mean it," she said. "Because if you walk away again, it's not just me you hurt this time." Cale held up his drawing. "It's not finished yet," he said, glancing between the two adults. Marin smiled faintly. "What is it?" "It's a treehouse," he replied, pointing to the uneven lines and stick figures. "One big room, with 2 beds and a telescope. One for me, one's for maybe him." He looked at Dorian. The child had no idea what he'd just offered. But to Dorian, it was more than imagination. It was an invitation. He cleared his throat. "I'd like that. If I'm ever invited to visit." Cale nodded slowly, as if considering it seriously. "You can come once I finish the telescope." Marin stayed quiet, but her eyes didn't harden. She watched the exchange closely, the way someone watches the edge of a cliff, hoping it holds. Robert stood slowly, keeping his gaze level with hers. "I didn't come today to win anything," he said. "Not your forgiveness, not his affection. I came because the thought of leaving this world without ever meeting him was unbearable, and because knowing you're the reason I'm still breathing, I needed to see you, to say something while I still had the chance." Marin looked away briefly, blinking once before her eyes found him again. "You want honesty?" she asked. "I didn't do this for you. I did it for him. I know, and I don't regret it," she added, her voice steady. "But it doesn't erase what came before." Robert nodded. "I'm not asking for it." She glanced at Cale, who was now lying on the grass, tongue poking from the side of his mouth as he concentrated on adding stars to the sky of his drawing. "I raised him on my own," she said. "I worked nights, took commissions where I could. There were months where food was tight, but he never felt it. I made sure of that." "I believe you," Robert replied, his voice low. "He's kind," she continued. "He shares even when he doesn't have to. He says goodnight to the moon. He cries if he thinks someone's being left out." A pause. "He's everything I hoped he'd be, and I will protect that with everything I have." "You should," Robert said. "He's incredible." There was silence between them again, but softer this time. Not accusatory, not heavy, just fragile. "You don't get to come back and pick up where you left off," she said. "I'm not trying to. You can't skip the part where you show up. I don't plan to." Marin studied him a little longer. Then, with measured grace, she nodded once. Cale called out, "Mama, look." She walked over. Robert followed slowly. Cale held up his paper again. "See, I made it for us." The stick figures were uneven, colorful, childlike, 3 shapes standing under stars next to the treehouse. One tall, one small, one in the middle. "Is that me?" Robert asked, pointing. Cale nodded. "I gave you blue pants," he said, "because you look like someone who has blue pants." Robert smiled faintly. "You're not wrong." Marin looked at the drawing, her hand resting lightly on Cale's back. He looked up at both of them. "Can we all go to the treehouse someday?" Marin didn't answer right away. Instead, she said, "Maybe." It wasn't a promise, but it wasn't a no, and for now, that was more than enough. They sat in the small consultation room beside the hospital garden. Marin leaned back in her chair, her arms folded across her chest, not in defiance, but in quiet self-protection. The room was still. Cale was in the adjoining space with a nurse and a tray of puzzles. Robert could hear his soft humming through the wall. He didn't speak right away. Neither did she. The truth had already been revealed. Now it was time to live inside it. "I never meant to leave you alone with all of it," Robert said quietly. Marin gave a small shake of her head, not out of disbelief, more like she'd already made peace with that chapter. "I tried," she said. "After you disappeared, I wasn't angry. I was confused, heartbroken, but I still believed you'd come back. Even when I found out I was pregnant, I held off telling anyone. I thought maybe, just maybe, you'd walk through the door." He swallowed hard, saying nothing. "But days turned into weeks, then months. I called your office, left messages, sent emails, I wrote to you directly. I didn't want anything, just for you to know, but your assistant cut me off. Eventually, I stopped trying. I realized you'd made your decision." Robert looked down at his hands. They were shaking. They were instructed to protect my time, my focus, not do that. "Well," she said. "They did." He could hear the exhaustion beneath her voice. Not bitterness, not spite, just fatigue born from carrying too much for too long. "I sold 3 of my original paintings to cover the first medical bills," she continued, voice soft but steady. "I worked the front desk at a dentist's office during the day, did commissions at night, slept when I could. I had to let the studio go." She paused. "There were nights when Cale was teething and I didn't have anyone to call. For days I walked home from the pharmacy with a bag of groceries and a toddler in the rain. I was scared, but I kept going. Because I didn't have the luxury of falling apart." Robert closed his eyes. He felt like someone had punched through his chest and left it hollow. Nothing in his world of numbers and assets had ever prepared him for this kind of devastation. The quiet kind. The kind with no dramatic outbursts, just accumulated absence. "You shouldn't have had to do it alone," he said. "No, I shouldn't have," she replied. "But I did, and I'm proud of who he's becoming." "You should be," he said. "He's incredible." There was a pause. "He loves stars," she said. "He thinks every shooting star grants a wish, even if you don't say it out loud. He sleeps with a flashlight under his pillow because he's convinced light keeps dreams from getting lost." Robert smiled faintly. "That sounds like magic." "He still believes in magic," she said. "And for now, that's enough." He looked toward the wall where Cale's voice had faded into quiet. He could picture him sitting cross-legged, probably chewing the end of a pencil while solving a puzzle meant for kids older than him. "I want to try," Robert said finally. "Not as a visitor, not as a passing shadow. I want to be in his life. However, you'll let me." Marin didn't answer right away. "I don't know what that looks like yet," she said, "but I know this much. He's not getting a second chance. He's not a way for you to fix the past." "I understand," he said. "He's a person," she continued, "not a project." "I'm not asking to start over," Robert said. "Just to start now." She studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded once. Not a full yes, but not a no. From the next room, Cale's voice rang out cheerfully. "Mama, I finished the puzzle." Marin stood. "He wants to show you," she said, gesturing toward the door. "Me." She gave a small nod. "If you're ready." He rose slowly. His legs felt like they were learning to move again. When he stepped into the room, Cale beamed. On the table was a completed puzzle of the solar system, every planet in place. "See," Cale said proudly. "I got them all right." "You really did," Robert said, crouching beside him. "Even Pluto." Cale tilted his head. "Some people say it's not a planet anymore." Robert smiled. "That's true, but I think it's still important, even if some people forget about it." Cale shrugged. "I won't forget it." Robert looked at him, and something warm, unsteady, began to form. Neither of them knew exactly what to call it, but it felt like a beginning. The next few days moved differently. Dorian, once chained to a calendar packed with meetings and strategy, calls, began making space for moments that couldn't be measured. He didn't force his way in. He showed up quietly. At first, Marin kept their meetings short, brief visits outside the pediatric wing, a few minutes at a time. She let Cale take the lead. And Cale, in his usual way, met Robert not with suspicion, but Curiosity. He asked questions, endless ones. Do you know how spaceships work? Can you build a robot that folds clothes? Why do grown-ups always say they're fine when they look tired? Robert answered what he could, admitted what he didn't know, laughed, sometimes awkwardly, but never unkindly. With each passing visit, something began to shift. Cale started reaching for his hand, started waiting for his face to appear in the hallway, started saving half his cookies, just in case you like the same flavor. Robert brought him books, nothing extravagant, just quiet stories about fathers and sons, stars and inventions, explorers who dared to ask big questions. One afternoon, Cale asked, "Were you scared when you found out you were sick?" Robert paused. "Yes, I was." Cale thought about that, then nodded. "It's okay to be scared. That's what Mama says. As long as you keep going." That sentence stayed with him long after the visit ended. That night, Robert sat in his apartment alone. His suit jacket hung over a chair. His tie lay untouched, and in front of him sat a drawing Cale had insisted he keep. A stick figure with dark hair, another with longer curls, a little one in between. Above them, a hand-drawn rocket. He didn't frame it. He didn't laminate it. He simply stared at it, because for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man with nothing left to lose. He felt like a man with everything to fight for. The following morning, he brought Cale a small science kit. Nothing flashy, just a collection of magnets, wires, and instruction cards. Cale lit up. "Can we make one together?" Robert looked to Marin. She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no. She only handed him a coffee and said, "He needs supervision with anything electric." It was the closest thing to permission she'd given so far. They sat on the floor of the waiting room, heads bent over the kit. Cale's hands worked quickly, his tongue pressed to his top lip in deep focus. "Careful," Robert said. "That one goes there." "Oops," Cale said. "Good catch." Marin watched from across the room, arms crossed, expression unreadable, but she didn't interrupt. When the little motor finally whirred to life, Cale whooped. "It works, look." Robert smiled, not the careful, reserved expression he wore in public, but something smaller, truer. Marin saw it, and for a second, she looked away, because she hadn't seen that version of him before, not even when they were together. After the project, Cale ran off to show a nurse. Marin and Robert sat quietly. "You're good with him," she said at last. "I'm learning," he replied. "You're trying," she corrected. "That matters." He nodded, eyes fixed on the hallway Cale had disappeared down. "I don't want to be just a visitor," he said. "I want to earn something better." Marin looked at him, not with certainty, but no longer with the wall she once carried between them. "Then keep showing up," she said. "That's how you start." Outside the hospital window, the city moved as it always had. Buses humming, people crossing intersections, lives continuing. But for Robert Vale, time was no longer marked by quarterly earnings or projected growth. Now, time was measured in drawings, in questions, in the quiet way a child reaches for your hand without thinking twice. And in the smallest, most unexpected ways, the man who once feared vulnerability was learning how to be someone's father. The days before the surgery blurred into something quieter, not slow, but intentional. Marin allowed Robert to spend more time with Cale, and by quiet extension with her. Nothing formal, no long declarations, just moments, subtle and simple. They took short walks around the hospital garden while Cale raced. Ahead, pretending the hedges were secret agents guarding treasure. Marin kept her distance emotionally, but her body language began to shift. She no longer faced away from him. She listened longer, and sometimes, when he said something that caught her off guard, her lips curled into the beginning of a smile. One afternoon, Cale insisted they sit together on the ground and draw with chalk on the edge of the walkway. Robert hesitated at first, but Marin had already taken a piece and started outlining a cat. "Come on," she said, without looking up. "You're not made of glass." He knelt beside her, picking up the blue chalk. "I haven't drawn since I was 8. "Perfect," she said. No pressure. Cale, of course, took over. He created a rocket with 3 windows and placed one figure in each. "Is that us?" Marin asked. Cale nodded. "We're going to space, but we have to hold hands, otherwise we'll float away." Robert looked at the drawing. 3 circles, 3 simple bodies, all connected by one long line. The message wasn't loud, but it was clear. That evening, after Cale had been taken for a nap, Robert and Maren remained on a bench beneath the garden's single tree. The air was still. The quiet between them had changed. It was no longer cold. It was waiting. She spoke first. "He's always drawing," she said. "Sometimes I wonder if it's his way of making sense of things. Like if he draws it, it becomes real." "I used to do that," Robert said softly. She looked at him. "I didn't know you drew." "Not for long," he replied. "It stopped when I was 9. "Why?" He hesitated. "Then, after a long pause, my father found one of my sketchbooks. I'd drawn a family of birds. The mother was feeding the baby. He looked at it and said, 'This is a waste of time.' Then he tore it in half." Maren's face softened. "I'm sorry." He shrugged. "I told myself I didn't care, but I never drew again." "You cared," she said. "You just learned not to show it." He nodded. For a moment they sat in silence. Then he added, "He believed discipline was love, that showing affection made you weak, that comfort was earned." Maren looked straight ahead. "And you believed him?" "For a long time." Her voice was quiet. "And what do you believe now?" Robert took a breath, eyes fixed on the chalk still staining his palms. "I believe I was wrong. About him, about how to be a man, about what matters." Cale's laughter echoed in the distance, carried from the nurse's station, where someone had told him a joke involving space pirates and jelly beans. "I used to think love was a threat," Robert said. "That if someone got too close, they'd see everything broken inside me." Maren didn't speak. She let the weight of his words sit between them. "But Cale," Robert continued, voice trembling slightly, "he doesn't look at me with fear or judgment, just curiosity. Like I'm a puzzle he wants to solve." Maren nodded slowly. "He's like that." Robert looked at her. "And you gave him that kindness, that softness, that belief that people are good until they prove otherwise." Maren glanced at him. "I was angry for a long time," she said, "but I never let him carry that. You shouldn't have had to carry it either." "I did. Because I had to." They sat in silence again. But this one wasn't heavy. It was full of things that no longer needed to be defended. If this story has touched something in you, a memory, a lesson, a moment of forgiveness, let us know in the comments. And if you haven't yet, tap subscribe. These stories are made for hearts like yours. Later that week, Robert arrived earlier than expected. Maren was in the hallway, reviewing paperwork with a nurse. Cale sat cross-legged in a corner, building a small structure out of foam blocks. When he saw Dorian, his face lit up. "You came early." "Wanted to make sure I didn't miss the tower," Robert said, setting down a small box he'd brought with him. Cale stood and peeked inside. "What is it?" Robert lifted the lid to reveal a wooden figure set, astronauts, planets, and a small base with movable pieces. "Thought we could build our own little world," he said. Cale looked at Maren. She raised an eyebrow but gave a short nod. 10 minutes later, they were both on the floor, arranging the pieces with focused determination. Cale gave each figure a name. The tallest one, with a painted compass on its chest, he handed to Dorian. "This one's the captain," Cale said. "Why me?" Robert asked. "Because you're learning." Robert paused. "Learning what?" "How to land somewhere new." Maren, standing just a few feet away, stopped reading. She didn't interrupt. She didn't smile. She just watched. That night, after Cale had gone home with her, Maren returned to the hospital with a paper bag. Inside was a container of soup, bread wrapped in foil, a small bottle of ginger tea. She found Robert reading in the patient lounge. He looked up, surprised. "You shouldn't be walking this much," he said. "I'm fine," she replied. "Brought you something." He accepted the bag, unsure how to react. Gratitude was unfamiliar territory. "I never cooked for you," she said, sitting across from him. "When we were together, you offered. I always said no. You didn't want to feel taken care of." He nodded slowly. "I thought accepting help meant losing control." Maren tilted her head slightly. "And now? Now I'm realizing I never had control, just distance." They sat in silence while he tasted the soup. It was warm, a little spicy, with just the right amount of salt. He hadn't realized how long it had been since someone had done something like this for him, without needing anything in return. "I'm scared," he said, without looking up. She looked at him, patient. Not just of the surgery, of failing him, of being more damaged than helping. "You're not perfect," she said. "Neither am I. But Cale doesn't need perfection. He needs a present." Robert nodded slowly. "I can do that." Maren leaned back. Her face was still reserved, but the softness was clearer now, less guarded. "There's something about the way he looks at you," she said. "Like he sees possibility, not history." He looked down. "That's the part I'm afraid I don't deserve." "You probably don't," she replied honestly. "But he hasn't asked for that. He's just asking for you." He met her eyes. "Why are you giving me this chance?" "Because I've spent the last 5 years trying not to hate you. And I don't want to live with bitterness anymore. For his sake. For mine." He let those words settle. He didn't try to defend himself. He didn't try to change her mind. He just nodded. "Thank you." She looked away, then back again. "Don't thank me yet." There was no forgiveness ceremony, no emotional breakdown, just soup, a quiet room, and the first real peace they had shared since their paths had broken. The morning before the operation, Cale arrived with a new drawing tucked carefully inside his backpack. Robert was already seated in the courtyard, sipping tea instead of coffee. The nurse said it would be better for his system, and he hadn't argued. Maren followed behind her son, her expression unreadable but her steps easy. Cale bounded over, opened the backpack, and held out the folded paper like it was treasure. "I made this for you," he said. Robert took it gently. "Can I open it now?" Cale nodded. "It's us again. But better." Robert unfolded the page. 3 stick figures. But this time, they stood inside something, a heart, roughly drawn, but clearly intentional. "We're inside the big heart," Cale explained. "Because even if you're not here every day, I think maybe you're still here." He tapped his chest. Robert didn't speak, couldn't. The paper trembled slightly in his hand. Maren watched, arms crossed, not cold, just steady. Robert looked up. "Did he come up with this on his own?" She nodded. "He said he wanted you to have something before the surgery, in case you got scared." Cale added, "Hearts are for brave people too, not just the scared ones." That did it. Robert reached forward, pulling his son, into a gentle hug. Cale went without hesitation, resting his head against Dorian's shoulder. "I'll be okay," Robert whispered. "You have to be," Cale replied, muffled. "I already put your guy in the rocket." They sat like that for a while, just breathing. Maren eventually joined them on the bench, seated beside Dorian. Not too close, but closer than before. They watched Cale chase a butterfly across the edge of the walkway, giggling as it danced above the flower beds. Robert turned toward her. "Whatever happens," he said, "thank you. For everything. For him. For this." She didn't reply right away. Then, in a voice gentler than he expected, she said, "You can thank me later, after you're healthy. After you show up for the hard parts." He nodded. "I plan to." Another pause. Then she added, "He thinks you're brave, you know. I'm not." "You're here," she said. "That's more than I ever thought I'd see." Robert looked back at Cale, arms outstretched like wings running in circles. "I missed so much," he said. "Yes," she replied. "But he's still here." Robert swallowed the weight in his throat. "Do you think, someday, we could all build something real?" Maren looked at him, long and quiet. "I think someday it depends on what you do with today." The morning of the surgery came without drama. No storm, no alarms, just quiet. Too quiet. Robert sat in the pre-op room, dressed in hospital blues, the back of his gown loose, his chest bare to the cold air and heart monitors. A nurse moved around him, checking vitals, scanning numbers, not speaking unless necessary. Across the room, Maren sat in the visitor chair, still and steady. Her presence was his only anchor. Cale wasn't allowed in this part of the wing. He'd given Robertone one last drawing before being escorted out, a rocket ship with a glowing sun. 3 tiny stick figures stood on top of the moon, waving. "So you don't forget where we are," Cale had said. Robert kept the drawing in his hand now, folded neatly, fingers gripping it tighter than he meant to. "Are you scared?" Maren asked. He looked up, terrified. She nodded. "You don't have to pretend." "I'm not," he said. "Not anymore." The door opened. The surgeon entered, clipboard in hand, calm but efficient. "We're ready when you are," he said. Robert didn't respond right away. He turned to Marin. If something happens, she stopped him with a look. Don't. I need to say this, he insisted. I don't want to leave anything unsaid. Her eyes softened. I'm sorry, he continued. For everything, for leaving, for staying gone, for not being the man I should have been. Marin blinked, but didn't speak. Robert turned the drawing over in his hand. If I make it through this, you will, she said firmly. If I do, he continued, I won't waste it. A long pause. She leaned forward, placing her hand over his, just for a second. No promises, no expectations, just presence. The nurse returned. It's time. They began unhooking his four-stand from the wall. The bed rolled forward. Marin stood and followed until the hallway forced her to stop. Robert looked back. She gave a small nod, and then he disappeared behind the door. Inside the operating room, the lights were bright, cold. The staff moved with trained precision. Heart monitors beeped, machines hummed, metal clinked softly as tools were prepped. Robert lay still, eyes fixed on the ceiling. He thought of balance sheets, mergers, deadlines. None of them mattered now. He thought of Cale's voice, Marin's strength, the drawing in his hand. He closed his eyes. Please, let me wake up differently. When Robert woke, it wasn't all at once. At first, it was just sound, the soft beep of a monitor, the shuffle of paper, a distant voice saying something he couldn't hold on to. Then pain, not sharp, but deep, like something sacred inside him had been rearranged. He tried to move, but his body answered with resistance. Don't, a voice said gently. You're okay, just rest. Marin. He blinked slowly, forcing his vision to focus. The hospital room was dim, curtains drawn halfway, sunlight curling around the edges like it wasn't sure it belonged there. Marin sat at his side, one hand resting on the arm of the chair. In her lap, she held a familiar sheet of paper. The drawing, Cale's rocket, the stick figures. The sun. You kept it, he rasped. I told him I would, she said softly. He asked me to give it to you after. Robert shifted slightly. Did he think I wouldn't wake up? No, she said. But he wanted you to have it, just in case. He closed his eyes. A tear slipped out before he could stop it. You made it, she whispered. I didn't know if I would. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. They sat in silence. There were no monitors screaming, no bustling nurses. Just breathe. Machines clicking, the hum of life moving forward. I thought about everything while I was under, he said, voice hoarse. Not work, not Arden, not a single meeting or number or deal. He turned to look at her. I thought about the first time I saw you with pain on your face. I thought about that kid's laugh, about missing his first words, his first steps, about what I threw away. Marin listened. She didn't try to comfort him. She let him sit in it, because she knew the feeling of holding hard truths in your chest. I'm done chasing things that leave me empty, he said finally. I want to come home, whatever that means. She lowered her gaze. It's not a switch you flip. I know. You can't just walk into a life you've never built and expect it to hold you. I'm not asking for a shortcut, he said. Just a place to start. She looked at him. There was no certainty in her eyes, but there was no resistance either. I told Cale you might need some time to get better. He said, that's okay. I can wait. Robert smiled faintly. He's better than I ever hoped a child of mine could be. He's who he is, she said, and he's looking for someone to learn from. He took that in, letting it land. Then he asked, can you bring him tomorrow? I already promised him you'd ask. They both smiled, and for the first time in a very long time, Robert didn't feel lost. If you've ever felt like it was too late to come home, or too far gone to make something right, let this be your reminder that grace often waits on the other side of humility. Share your thoughts below, hit the like button, and subscribe for more stories that reach where words usually can't. 3 weeks after the operation, Robert stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, the very top of Arden Tower, one last time. The skyline stretched endlessly, steel and glass stacked like a monument to ambition. His ambition. This view had once thrilled him. He'd fought tooth and nail to earn it. Now, it felt cold. His assistant stepped in. They're ready for you in the boardroom. He turned. They'll be fine without me. She hesitated. Is this goodbye? He nodded. It's time. She didn't argue. She just reached into her drawer and handed him a sealed envelope. From the mailroom, she said. No sender, just marked personal. He opened it slowly. Inside was a drawing. Crayons. Bold lines. A sun, a tree, a little house with a garden. 3 stick figures holding hands. Cale. Robert smiled. Send them my gratitude, he said. And tell the board I've stepped down. Permanently. He left the envelope on the desk. He didn't look back. 6 weeks later, the moving truck pulled up to a quiet cul-de-sac. The neighborhood was simple. Children rode bikes without helmets. The lawns weren't perfect. Dogs barked. There was space to breathe. Marin met him on the sidewalk, arms folded, hair tucked in a messy knot. She raised one eyebrow as he stepped out of the car. Are you sure about this? She asked. I've never been more sure of anything. No assistance, no driver, no penthouse view. Just dinner at 6, he said, and bedtime stories I've never read before. She smiled faintly. He looked toward the house. Is he home? He's in the back, drawing rocket ships. Robert took a slow breath. Think he's ready for this? He's been ready, she said. The question is, are you? He didn't answer with words. He reached into the trunk, pulled out a box labeled Cale's room in thick marker, and carried it toward the front door. Later that night, Cale sat in his lap, yawning, a book half open in his small hands. Robert read the last page aloud, voice steady, careful. And so, the star found its way back, not because it had to shine, but because it finally knew where it belonged. Cale leaned against his chest. Marin stood at the doorway, watching, not intruding. When Robert looked up, she mouthed 2 words, thank you. He smiled. A real one. Because now, every heartbeat felt earned. The days that followed weren't dazzling. They were simple, steady, honest. Robert rose early, not to answer emails or review portfolios, but to pack. A small lunchbox with carrots and peanut butter sandwiches cut into stars. Cale liked stars. He walked him to school, listened to his morning ramble about sea turtles and superheroes, then stood beneath the faded flagpole as his son disappeared through the classroom door. It wasn't easy. There were moments when doubt whispered, when guilt still tried to take the wheel. But he didn't run from it. He let it stay, as a reminder of where he'd been and why he couldn't go back. One evening, as the sky dimmed and Marin was finishing a sketch at the kitchen table, Robert found Cale on the back steps, humming. Can I sit? Robert asked. Cale scooted over without a word. They sat shoulder to shoulder. Do you remember when you gave me that rocket drawing? Robert asked gently. Cale nodded. You still have it? Framed, right next to my bed. A small smile tugged at Cale's cheek. I made it fast, but I meant it. I know, Robert replied. It helped me more than you think. They were quiet for a moment. Then Cale asked, Did you like me right away, when you found out I was yours? Robert turned toward him, his voice steady. I loved you before I even knew your name. Cale blinked. I was scared, Robert admitted. Not because of you, but because I thought I wasn't good enough to be your dad. You don't have to be perfect, Cale whispered. Just don't go away again. The words pierced deeper than any boardroom takedown ever had. Robert pulled him gently into his arms. I'm here now, he said. I'm not leaving again, ever. That night, when the house was quiet and Cale was asleep, Robert found Marin outside in the small garden she'd started behind the fence. She was barefoot, her hands dirty, planting herbs beneath the porch light. You always liked making things grow, he said, approaching slowly. She didn't stop digging. You always liked tearing things down. He flinched, but didn't leave. I deserved that. Yes, she said. You did. He knelt beside her. I'm not asking you to forget, he said quietly, but I am asking you to see me now. Not the man who left, not the one who ran, but the one who's trying to stay. She finally looked at him. There was no softness, no cruelty either, just the truth. You don't earn trust with words, she said. You prove it with presence. I know. Good. She stood, dusting her hands on her jeans. Before walking inside, she glanced back once. You can water them in the morning. Start small. He nodded, watching her disappear into the house. Start small. That he could do. If you were Robert, given a second chance at the life you once ran from, would you fight for it, or walk away again? Let me know in the comments. And if this story has moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe. Here on the Mr. Ross Story Trail, we believe it's never too late to begin again. Weeks passed. Nothing loud. No headlines. No dramatic announcements. Just a life being rebuilt, one small kindness at a time. Robert learned how to braid his son's hair on silly days when Cale wanted to look like a superhero. He learned how to fold laundry without turning everything inside out. He fixed a broken drawer in Marin's studio without being asked, leaving a sticky note on it that simply read, "Still learning. But I won't quit." Some evenings, he and Marin would sit on the porch, sipping tea in silence. Not because there was nothing to say, but because silence finally felt safe. He didn't press. He didn't chase. He let her decide when to lean closer. Some days she did. Other days she didn't. But she no longer kept her distance out of fear. And he no longer filled the gap with excuses. One night, while Cale was at a friend's sleepover, Robert walked into the living room and found Marin curled up on the couch, reading a book. A soft instrumental melody played from the old speakers she loved. He hesitated, then sat beside her. After a long pause, he asked, "Do you think I'm different now?" She closed the book slowly. "I think you're becoming," she said. Later that night, Robert stood alone in the backyard. The stars above were quiet witnesses. No spotlight, no roaring boardroom applause, just soil under his feet, the scent of lavender from Marin's garden, and the sound of a wind chime brushing against the eaves. He took a breath, then spoke softly, more to himself than anyone else. "I used to think strength meant never apologizing, never needing anyone. I thought love made you weak, that need made you small, but I was wrong. Strength is showing up for someone even when you're afraid. Strength is asking for forgiveness without expecting it. Strength is staying. I didn't earn this family, but I was given a chance to love them, and that's more than I deserve. So every day I wake up, I'll do what I couldn't before. I'll choose them." And with that quiet promise hanging in the night air, Robert turned back toward the house, not the tower he once ruled, but the home he was slowly helping build. A home where love no longer had to be chased, only nurtured. The sun was just beginning to warm the earth, casting a golden blush over the wooden fence that lined their backyard. It was quiet, not the kind of quiet that feels empty, but the kind that feels earned. Marin stood before the back wall of their new home, a brush in her hand, smudges of paint on her forearm, concentration in her brow. She was finishing a mural, not of abstract shapes or swirling chaos like she used to paint in her downtown studio. This one was different. It was simple, a family of 3, holding hands beneath a wide tree, roots stretching deep into the ground. The figures weren't detailed, just outlines, but they were unmistakably them. Robert sat a few steps away on the patio, coffee cooling in his hand. Cale darted across the lawn barefoot, chasing butterflies like it was a mission of global importance. His laughter bubbled up and burst like sunlight. He wore a cape made out of a dish towel and his favorite socks mismatched. Robert watched him, his expression soft. The man who had once towered over glass boardrooms, who used to weigh his worth by net profits and quarterly charts, now counted happiness by Saturday mornings and the sound of bare feet on grass. "Need help?" he asked gently. Marin didn't look away from the wall. "Are you offering to paint?" He chuckled. "I can supervise. You'd mess up the proportions," she said, lips curling. "Probably." She stepped back, hands on her hips, tilting her head to examine her work. He rose from his seat and approached slowly, taking in the mural up close. The tree's branches reached outward, generous and steady. "I love it," he said. "It's not done." He turned to her. "It feels finished to me." She met his eyes. "Maybe you're just not used to seeing things stay." He considered that, not with defensiveness, but reflection. "You're right," he said, "but I'm learning." She lowered her gaze, brushing a spot on the mural with fresh color. "You're doing better. I want to be the kind of man who never gives you a reason to start over again," he said. A pause. "I don't need perfect," she replied. "I just need a present." Cale's voice rang out behind them. Come see. Come see." They turned to find him holding a jar, a small butterfly inside fluttering gently. I didn't hurt it, he said quickly. I just wanted to look. I'm gonna let it go now. They walked over to him as he carefully opened the lid. The butterfly hesitated, then lifted into the air, its wings catching the morning light. Cale's eyes tracked it as it disappeared into the sky. Where do butterflies go? He asked. Marin smiled. Wherever they want. Robert knelt beside him. You think it'll come back? Cale shrugged. Maybe. But it doesn't have to. He ran back to the grass, arms stretched wide like wings. Robert watched him until he was just a blur of motion and joy. Then he turned to Marin. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? She asked. For saving me. She looked at him for a long moment, her voice low, steady. You saved yourself, Dorian, she said. I just gave you the reason. He stepped closer, brushed a stray hair from her cheek. You and Cale are my reason. You always were. I just didn't know how to hold on to something that pure. Until now. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Instead, she reached for his hand. And they stood there, fingers intertwined, watching the boy with the dish towel cape soar across the yard. No papers to sign. No speeches to give. Just three people. Alive. Together. Home. May every soul that's ever walked away find the courage to return. And may those who've been left behind have hearts soft enough to receive them when they do. May love not just be something we say, but something we choose. Daily, gently, without pride. Amen. Sometimes life doesn't give us a clean slate. It gives us a second chance with jagged edges, painful, imperfect, and utterly worth fighting for. This story wasn't about grand revenge or flashy romance. It was about growth, about a man who once thought power meant silence, who learned that real strength is in presence, about a woman who gave without conditions, not because she forgot the pain, but because she refused to let pain become her identity, and about a little boy born of a love that had been broken, yet still bloomed in the cracks. Life isn't always loud, but it can be healing. We often measure redemption by dramatic change, a loud apology, a public shift, a sweeping transformation. But the truth? Redemption shows up quietly. It looks like brushing a child's hair before school. It sounds like I'm here now. It feels like showing up, even when you're not sure if you're wanted, and staying long enough to earn the right to be. Forgiveness is a door, not a guarantee. Marin didn't welcome Robert back with open arms. She had every right not to, but she gave space. Space for him to prove that his apology wasn't a performance. Space for healing to take root, not overnight, but over time. And that choice, to let love try again, is a kind of strength that often goes unnoticed. You don't fix the past, you build on it. Robert couldn't rewrite the years he'd lost. He couldn't reclaim the first steps he missed, or the nights Marin cried alone, wondering if she'd ever be enough. But he could start today, and he did, not with speeches, but with actions, with showing up, with holding steady. A child's heart can teach a grown man to heal. Cale didn't need his father to be perfect. He just needed him to stay. His curiosity, his drawings, his honesty, they softened edges that business meetings and boardrooms never could. He reminded us all that sometimes the truest kind of love is uncomplicated. Don't go away again. That one sentence held more power than 1,000 promises. Healing begins when pride ends. The turning point wasn't the surgery. It wasn't the diagnosis. It wasn't even a reunion in the garden. It was the moment Robert dropped his guard and said, I thought I wasn't good enough to be your dad. Not in front of a crowd, not for applause. Just one man, finally brave enough to speak the truth and let it break something open inside him. That's where healing starts. When pride lets go and honesty steps in, love doesn't need to be loud. It needs to be chosen. Not once, but daily. It's in the garden, washing the dishes, waiting for someone to trust you again, and staying long after they do. Maybe someone out there needed this story today. Maybe you've left someone behind. Or maybe you've been the one waiting for someone to come back. Either way, know this, the past doesn't define you. But the choices you make next, they will. Choose wisely. Choose love. Even when it's hard. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that love can heal, that time doesn't erase hope, and that redemption is always possible, don't forget to like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the Mr. Ross Story Trail. We share stories that don't just entertain, they transform. Until next time, keep believing in the power of second chances,